Welcome to Front Office Pros. Today, we're going to be going through a Superflex IDP rookie mock draft with landing spots based on Chad Reuter from NFL Network's 5-round mock draft that he released last Friday.
Hike!
You may see a lot of Superflex mock drafts out there with landing spots, but not with IDP. So this is going to look a little bit different. And so we're going to forewarn you of this because based on the way that Joe and I did this mock draft, we're doing it based off of big play scoring, which means that defensive players can score just as much as offensive players. So be aware of that as we go through this mock draft. Joe, let's start off with you first. Who do you have at the 101?
Yeah, at the 101, I have running back Genty, and the landing spot was with the Las Vegas Raiders.
All right, and for me at the 101, I also have running back Genty, and like Joe said, he went to the Las Vegas Raiders. So, Joe, what was your reasoning behind Genty at the 101? I also have him at the 101 as well. We're probably going to have some similar thoughts here.
Yeah, I just think, Genty could possibly be that, like, for fantasy, that one can't-miss guy of this draft, especially from the offensive side. It's far more deep and more talent on the defensive side in this draft. But Genty going to the perfect landing spot, too, with the Las Vegas Raiders. I mean, we've mentioned it in prior episodes here, just how depleted they are at that position. Zamir White, Sincere McCormick, they really need a guy. And we know with Pete Carroll going in there, he likes to run the ball, do a lot of play action stuff. Seeing the production, like when Marshawn Lynch was there and other running backs that he's had be very productive. So that's kind of why I have him at the 101 here.
It's interesting because we just recently did an episode talking about what are the best landing spots. I think you and I both might have said the Raiders for Genty. Or no, did I say – I might have said the Patriots and you said the Raiders. Do you remember?
I don't remember if I said.
No, we both said Judkins for the Raiders. That's what we said.
I was going to say. I think I said the Bears.
Okay, yeah. Okay, we had Judkins, but nevertheless, I agree with you. The Raiders would be one of the best landing spots for any running back. So if Genty were to go there, he'd be the workhorse back. They have nobody in the backfield, and like you said, with Carroll as the head coach, we saw what he's been able to do with running backs in the past. So I know you and I kind of maybe steer away from the grain. A lot of people will say talent first, then landing spot. I think you and I kind of view it more as a 50-50 split. Obviously, talent is important, but in this situation, Genty, probably the most talented. Combine that with a great landing spot, he's got to go the 101.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I mean, talent can only get you so far. And if you can have all the talent in the world, but if you don't go in a productive situation or just a bad organization that doesn't have the, stability at coaching or even in their front office, like that can ruin even the most talented players.
All right, so let's head over to the 102. Who do you have there?
Yep, at the 102, I decided to go with Travis Hunter. We'll say cornerback, and they had him projected to go to the Cleveland Browns.
All right, so at the 102, I am copycatting you so far, Joe. I'm also going at the 102 with cornerback Travis Hunter, and he went to the Cleveland Browns, like you said. Now, for this pick, again, probably some similar reasoning. This wasn't as good of a landing spot, I felt like, with the Cleveland Browns. What was your reasoning for why you put Hunter at the 102?
Yeah, even though this isn't probably the best landing spot for him, I just think with his potential to play both sides of the ball now, I'm not expecting it to be full-time like it was in college, but he joins a very talented cornerback group. Guys like Denzel Ward, I mean, Martin Emerson has come along. He's a pretty good corner. And then you got Travis Hunter, who's also a very good corner in himself. And we always say, like, we want good corners to go to other teams that have established cornerbacks, and that's what the Browns do provide. And then their wide receiver room is far from being stacked as well. I mean, they got Cedric Tillman, who we think is interesting. Jerry Jeudy's there, David Njoku at tight end. But then after that, they don't really have anybody. There's still question marks at quarterback. Maybe they are able to go ahead and acquire Kirk Cousins and him be the guy. And honestly, if that were to happen, I'd be pretty excited with Travis Hunter.
Yeah, don't forget Denzel Ward, too, a corner who has done quite well with the Cleveland Browns. So you have a secondary that's not all that bad. Plus, you got some pass rush help with Myles Garrett. You want to have some sort of pressure. It doesn't matter who the corner is. They can only cover a guy for so long.
Yep.
So they need some sort of pass rush. So I think on the defensive side, I feel better about him than on the offensive side, because if Kenny Pickett's the quarterback, that's a little bit concerning. So we'd want to, have another quarterback come in. If Kirk Cousins comes in, that's great. But like you said, because of the depth of the receiver group, he should be able to moonlight as a receiver with no issue. There's not a lot of depth there, so he should get some snaps. So I think overall, he's a unicorn. I almost thought about putting him at the 101, but what ended up causing me to put Ginty 101 is just because the combination of talent and the landing spot is just, you couldn't get any better. So to me, that's why it was close, but I ended up putting Hunter at 102.
Yeah, honestly, I toyed with the idea of putting him at the 101 too. I just felt like, in terms of at the 101, like as far as like who could possibly be the safest pick, especially with the landing spot as well, I felt Genty was that guy. And where, yes, the intrigue is there for Hunter and to play both sides of the ball. If it is the Browns, it's just there is a little bit of risk involved there.
All right, so who do we got at the 103?
Yeah, at the 103, I've got edge rusher Abdul Carter, and he went to the New England Patriots.
All right, so heading over the 103 for me. Joe, you and I are lockstep tonight. I'm going with 103 being Abdul Carter, defensive end for the New England Patriots. So, so far, 1, 2, 3, we're right in lockstep here, Joe. What was your reasoning for Abdul Carter here at the 103?
Yeah, honestly, I like the landing spot of the New England Patriots. I mean, we keep talking about how their acquisitions along the defensive front, but then also, Carlton Davis coming over at cornerback to pair with, Christian Gonzalez, who was already there existing. So, you got Landry, who came over on the outside, Milton Williams to play in the inside on top of, what they already had with a guy like Keion White. So just a combination of all that, and they don't really have, defensive end was kind of a weak spot for them. They, outside of having Anthony Jennings. So Abdul Carter gets a great opportunity. And then, like we said, we got the big play scoring awards for the sacks, QB hits and things like that. And I just think with that scoring, he's got the potential to score very well.
Now, obviously, if you're playing, this would depend on if you're playing in a full IDP league. If you're only playing 1 or 2, 3 IDPs, then this probably doesn't make any sense for us. You're playing 11 starters on IDP, just like you see on a typical NFL defense. So I'm with you. I mean, this guy's a generational talent, and in our league, defensive ends, you could argue, are the kind of similar to a Superflex league. You're looking at defensive ends probably as the second, if not the third most important position. Wide receivers and defensive ends are pretty much right around the same billing. So to me, a guy like Abdul Carter, who now he goes and works for Mike Vrabel as the head coach, you telling me he can't get the most out of this guy? And you didn't mention him, Joe, but another bookend that they got brought in, Harold Landry. Harold Landry is a good player too. So they got Keion White. They've got some really good, Barmore, they're saying now is going to be coming back. This defense is starting to look a little bit more scary. So thinking about bringing in a guy like Abdul Carter, and on top of it, it's a combination of talent and landing spot, and I just don't think you can get much better. So to me, I told maybe he had to go higher as well, but there's other ones that just, at the end of the day, I mean, it was tough because you had a guy like Ashton Ginty, which you and I both think is really good. But from a positional value standpoint, okay, after 4 or 5 years, what's Ginty's value? Whereas Carter and even Hunter, you're talking their value could go 7, 8, 9 years.
Yeah, that is the tough part. And I don't always love taking running backs, especially at the 101, but it's just like Genty just seems like that can't-miss guy. And it just, he seems like you'd be missing out if you didn't grab him there.
All right, so let's go over to the 104. Let's see if you and I are the same here again, Joe.
Yeah. I ended up going with running back Omarion Hampton, projected to go to the Pittsburgh Steelers.
All right, and for me at the 104, I did not go the same direction as you, so we got a little bit of a switch up. I went with running back Travion Henderson when Chad Reuter had him going to the Dallas Cowboys in the second round. So 2 running backs here. We went on a different thought process. Why did you end up going with Hampton? And I'll explain why I went with Henderson.
Yeah, I just feel like with Hampton, I feel like Steelers are a great landing spot. They're looking to kind of fill that Najee Harris role, and Hampton's a similar back. I feel like he fits what the Steelers want to do well. He's that power back. He also has some good receiving ability, kind of similar to Najee Harris as well. I know Jaylen Warren is there, but I just think given where they are, and the Arthur Smith system. The Steelers, they want to run the ball first, go off of play action. So I think Hampton on the Steelers makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I decided I thought between the two. I ended up going with Henderson. My reason being is I just like the situation a little bit better in Dallas. You've got Miles Sanders on a 1-year prove it deal, as well as Javonte Williams. I'm not concerned about them. So now Henderson comes in. He takes the bulk of the carries. And obviously he's got that home run hitting ability. And I think they're going to want to take pressure off of Dak. So, when you think about Pittsburgh, you still got Jalen Warren there. So how much of a factor is he going to be? They also have Kenneth Gainwell, both pass catching running back. So would O'Marion Hampton only play just first or second down? Would he play all 3 downs? They've rotated in the past. So it was close, but I ended up liking Travion Henderson a little bit better. They both bring different skill sets, but I went with Henderson.
Henderson makes a lot of sense too with the Cowboys. I mean, that's a really good situation for him.
Right, so how about the 105? Who do you got there?
Yeah, I ended up, this is Superflex after all. I ended up going to quarterback Cam Ward, going to the Tennessee Titans.
All right, and then for me at the 105, I went with O'Marion Hampton, running back, and like we just talked about, he went to the Pittsburgh Steelers. So, Joe, now a quarterback is finally off the board, and I'm sure probably for those who are tuning in, they're probably ready to throw the tomatoes at us and say, this is Superflex, guys. What are you doing not having a quarterback here? You finally bring one on the board. What was your reasoning here?
Yeah, I just felt like, I didn't want to overdo it with the quarterbacks, and to be honest, I'm not really excited about a lot of these guys. But in terms of, looking at the remaining players that I was ranking, felt like it made sense to have Cam Ward in here, and like he's gonna get every opportunity to start with the Tennessee Titans and play right away. So given that, I know like with the Titans, he doesn't have the best weapons around him. With Calvin Ridley, Chico Conquo, they don't really have. I know Tyler Boyd's there as well, but they don't really have a true wide receiver too. Maybe they get that in the draft in the second round. But they got an offensive coach, and with the quarterback situation, I think it made sense to put him here at 5.
Yeah, I'll be talking about him in a little bit, so I will reserve my thoughts on the quarterback position as whole, but Cam Ward in particular. So I went with Hampton here. Similar, thought to what you had before. I do think that he's a very talented player. Some have been talking about him even sneaking into the first round. So I believe in this mock, Chad had him going in the second round and not in the first round. So it'll be interesting to see if where he ends up going. There's a lot of smoke as to whether he sneaks in the first round. Some say like, oh, well, he's actually a third round talented running back. He's one of those ones that for whatever reason, there's a little bit more mystery to him. But I think he's a very talented player. You and I both do. And I think going to Pittsburgh would be a good landing spot. Not the best, but I think a good one.
Reuters got Hampton was a first round pick.
Steelers we did have him as a first round. Okay, I thought okay. No, I thought for some reason
Henderson though he had in the second round.
Okay, so he does have him in the first round. So that's interesting that he did. Chad Reuter did sneak that up in the first round.
But yeah, that is the latest buzz.
That he is a first rounder.
Yeah, that he is a first rounder. Yep.
Yeah. Well, I mean, similar buzz, came before when we had Bijan Robinson and Jahmyr Gibbs. I remember Peter Schrager talking about how Gibbs was going to be a first round pick. And they're like, oh, yeah, we'll see. And then the Lions took him at like 12. And we were like, what?
And they were like, oh, what are the Lions doing?
Well, they knew what they were doing.
They sure
so
did.
Let's head over to the 106. Who do you got there?
Yep. At the 106, I ended up going with wide receiver Tyrone McMillan, and his landing spot was the Dallas Cowboys.
All right. At the 106, I went with quarterback Cam Ward. Finally joined the quarterback group. So, Joe, what was your reasoning behind your pick here at 106?
Yeah, I decided to go with McMillan. Really liked the landing spot with the Dallas Cowboys, and him being that number 2 wide receiver opposite of CeeDee Lamb, I think will be really productive. And, we've seen Dak Prescott support multiple guys in an offense before, and it'll be interesting. I know there is potential with Schottenheimer coming in. Maybe they do shift more towards the run game and pass less and put less pressure on Dak, like you were saying. But I still think even if that is the case, I think McMillan and CeeDee Lamb should be fine.
Yeah, I mean, so here's my logic when it comes to Cam Ward and this quarterback class as a whole. Just because Superflex is that good of a position and it's the most important position in this format, it doesn't mean in my mind you then manufacture their value and bring them up higher and inflate them when I don't think they should. Think about even going back to the Trevor Lawrence draft, right? You had Trevor Lawrence, Zach Wilson, Mac Jones, Justin Fields, Trey Lance, right? You had all these quarterbacks, especially a guy like Lance, who you thought, wow, he's with San Francisco. He's going to do so much. Depending on some drafts, they may have drafted Trey Lance over a guy like Jamar Chase, or not as good
Right.
as Jalen Waddle or Kyle Pitts or Devonta Smith, right? But it's like, if you drafted Trey Lance over Jamar Chase, like, your team is going a way different direction, right? I mean, like, and I think probably, depending on how Superflex goes, people might have not, that was a great landing spot at the time. So they were like, wow, Lance going to the 49ers? Like, oh man, like he's got to be 102, 103, right?
Yeah.
So you got to be really careful with that, because if you got players who we believe are either like blue chip players that we think could really impact your dynasty rosters, I don't know if any of these quarterbacks are really going to make it. I mean, this could be, I'm trying to think of like the Kenny Pickett draft class, right? Where Kenny Pickett was the only first round quarterback, and then we had Malik Willis, and and then the list goes
Yeah.
on, right? Mind you, Cam Ward is going to go 101, and Pickett was 21, so it's not the same. But you've got to hope that Cam Ward is a reliable. I mean, I don't know if he'll ever be elite, but you'd hope that he's at least a reliable starter in the mid, QB3 territory for him to benefit you. I don't know. To me, I think he's got the most promise. He has the biggest opportunity being at the 101, working with a guy like Callahan. Hopefully, Callahan has another year. If they don't, I'm really nervous for Cam Ward. So I felt like the 106 made sense to me. To put him at the 101, just because of Superflex, I think is nuts. I just think there are, the guys we talked about ahead. These are blue chip type players. These guys that can impact your roster right away. I just don't see it.
Yeah. Yeah. I think those guys that we talked about are definitely the blue chip type quarter or players, where I don't think there's any blue chip type quarterbacks in this draft. I mean, that was last draft class. Everyone knows that one was absolutely stacked. This one, just isn't the case. But at the end of the day, like, Cam Ward is going to get an opportunity and could be productive. But like you said, I didn't want it just because he's going to be the first pick in the NFL. Didn't mean I just wanted to slot him there for this fantasy mock draft here.
So let's head over to the 107. Who do you got there?
Yeah, at the 107, I've got running back Trevion Henderson, and as you mentioned earlier, Steve, his landing spot was the Dallas Cowboys.
All right, at the 107 for me, I went with running back Quinshon Judkins. He ended up going to the Chicago Bears in the second round of Chad Reuter's mock draft. So, Joe, what were your thoughts here on the 107? You finally bring Henderson on the board a little bit later than me, but still respectable.
Yeah, I mean, similar thought to you, Steve. I mean, just the opportunity that he has there. We know the Dallas Cowboys like to use that bell cow guy as well. Javante's there on the 1 year deal, like you mentioned. Also Miles Sanders. I mean, neither guy I'm really afraid of. And if Trevion Henderson really does get the workload with his talent and, like you said, that breakaway speed that he does have, I could see him being in Dallas and doing really well.
So for me, with going with Judkins, I'm the first one to bring his name up. And I think at the end of the day, we saw what Ben Johnson was able to do with Detroit with that 1-2 tandem of Sonic and Knuckles, right? You had David Montgomery, who was that bruiser back, and then he had a speed guy. Now, I don't know if DeAndre Swift is the running back that he would like to use. He obviously is familiar with him during Swift's time in Detroit, but I don't think Roschon Johnson's the power back. So as a result, if you bring in a guy like
he
Judkins,
got some goal line touches last year.
He did. But I think that if Judkins is drafted in this scenario under Reuters mock, you might as well kiss any of your shares goodbye when it comes to Roschon Johnson. So I think Judkins, I get really excited about what Ben Johnson would be able to do with him. And so Is he an elite prospect? I wouldn't say that. I think Judkins is a solid running back prospect, probably one of the better ones over the past few years. But I think it's a good landing spot, not great, but I'm excited about the tandem with Ben Johnson here.
Yeah, and I'll be talking about Judkins in a little bit here, so I'll talk more then.
Well, how about going over to the 108? Who do you got there?
So yeah, at the 108, I've got running back Quinshon Judkins, and like you said, he's with the Chicago Bears.
You weren't kidding.
Nope, I wasn't kidding.
Well, the 108, I've got wide receiver Luther Burden, who ended up going to the Las Vegas Raiders in the second round of Chad Reuter's mock draft. So a little bit interesting, me picking up Burden. You haven't said Burden yet, and him actually going in the second round. But let's hear your thoughts on Judkins first. What was your rationale there?
Yeah, like you said, I mean, I really like the fit. Going to the Chicago Bears after they, beef up their offensive line, get Ben Johnson there. We know that he likes to run the ball first, and you mentioned the tandem that they had there in Detroit. I think maybe it'll be interesting to see if they don't take another running back later, and maybe he does get more of that power and speed combo. Because you're right, I don't know if they necessarily have that with DeAndre Swift behind Judkins if this is the case. But nevertheless, being that it should be a run first offense, and with Judkins' ability, I really like this landing spot for him.
Honestly, based on how deep this class is, I mean, I wouldn't even be surprised if the Chicago Bears double dip. Maybe they get a speed guy later on in the draft, and they get both in the same draft. It wouldn't be crazy, honestly. I've seen crazier things. As for Burden, I think it's a great opportunity for Burden. You wouldn't think that the Raiders are a great landing spot. With Geno Smith there, Geno Smith did, I think, a decent job in supporting guys like Tyler Lockett, DK Metcalf during his time in Seattle. So, he's still going to be following the same type of offense that he did now. Now he's coming over in Las Vegas with Pete Carroll as the head coach. So who do we have at wide receiver for the Las Vegas Raiders? You've got Jacoby Myers, and that's about it, right? I mean, we talked about Trey Tucker before as a guy who's like a speedster guy. Luther Burden, if this mock draft were to happen in real life here, Burden's the number one guy, clear as day. And I think that they could really, I think he get a lot of volume. Now, obviously, you got Brock Bowers to contend with, but I think there's still enough targets to go around. So I actually really like this landing spot for Burden.
Yeah, I really liked his landing spot as well.
All right, who do you got for the 109, Joe?
Well, ironically enough, I've got wide receiver Luther Burden going to the Las Vegas Raiders.
There you go. All right. Well, at the 109, talking about a guy that you talked about a couple picks ago, that was Tetaiora McMillan, wide receiver for the Dallas Cowboys. So, Joe, everyone just heard my thoughts on Burden. What are your thoughts on Burden here?
Yeah, in the similar vein, just the opportunity there. Really like the landing spot with the Raiders. Just having Jacoby Myers there and Brock Bowers. Trey Tucker in the slot could be an interesting piece there with his speed. And then it'd be interesting. They got Chip Kelly there as the offensive coordinator. How would he? How does he utilize Luther Burden? We know he kind of is a creative guy, and he's an offensive minded guy. It'd be interesting to see kind of what he draws up for a guy like Luther Burden, who's just really good after the catch and making some big plays.
Yeah, that's a good point. I didn't even think about that as far as Chip Kelly and utilizing his creativity. Yeah. I went McMillan here a little bit later than you did. I don't like the landing spot as much as you do. I think that CeeDee Lamb is the alpha receiver in that Dallas Cowboys offense. I think McMillan would be a nice 2, but I don't think he'd be a 1A, 1B scenario. It kind of reminds me of like an A.J. Brown, Devonta Smith type of scenario where A.J. Brown's the guy and Devonta Smith has some flash games. But I think if McMillan would have went to a different offense where he could have been the one, I think I'd be more excited. But CeeDee Lamb, outside CeeDee Lamb, even think of like a Jamar Chase and T. Higgins, right? Like I think McMillan could be like a T. Higgins type, but he's, T. Higgins is like the wide receiver, like, 20s, right? Maybe wide receiver 15 at the best, right? Where Chase is your wide receiver 1, 2, 3. So that ceiling that McMillan can have, I think, with like a guy like Burden, he gets more opportunities because there's nobody else there.
Yeah, no doubt Burden gets more opportunities, but I don't know. McMillan brings a different dynamic with just how big he is, as well, and just different. It's a difference maker. Yeah, I mean, I'd be curious to see how if that were to happen, how the Cowboys would utilize both of those guys. But I don't know if it's as a negative being opposite of CD Lamb is kind of what you think.
All right, so who do you got for the 110, Joe?
All right, at the 110, I went with linebacker Jahad Campbell with the Colts.
All right, and for me at the 110, I went with tight end Tyler Warren, who ended up getting drafted by the Carolina Panthers in the first round. So we went different directions here. You went linebacker, I went tight end. Thoughts on this Campbell spot? I didn't really like it as much. Was Zaire Franklin there? Obviously, he's a tackling machine. Although EJ Speed, who has done quite well, and he would now went to Houston. I think I know where you're going with this.
Yeah, that's the thought. You know, EJ Speed was really that athletic guy with a lot of with no pun intended here, but he had a lot of the speed and was good in coverage. And I'd be curious, you know, with Anaromo coming over and being the defensive coordinator and see how he uses, you know, the athletic ability of a guy like Jahad Campbell. And I think Jahad Campbell just brings a different dynamic than Zaire Franklin is. You know, I know Franklin's a big tackle guy, but I think, you know, Campbell just being that with his athleticism, I think him having the opportunity to go and blitz and have the opportunity to get sacks, but then, you know, also kind of help and play coverage and really fill that role that EJ Speed left behind.
So I went with a different direction. I obviously went with Tyler Warren. And, you think about a guy like Bryce Young. We talk about a young quarterback's best friend as a tight end position. They really need a security blanket right in the middle of that offense. And I think Tyler Warren will be able to do that. You and I, maybe I was thinking, we didn't talk about this specifically in the title. Our league, we go based off of tight end premium. So, that's where kind of my mind was going to in this. But even without tight end premium, I think a lot of mock drafts that you see out there are having Tyler Warren go in the first round because this guy is looking like a top 12 type of pick. So for a tight end even to go in the top 10, that tells you that he's got a lot of value.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I hated this landing spot though, just because.
Really?
Yeah, I mean, so you're just ready to discard Jatavian Sanders, who they drafted last year, right out the window.
Yes.
Oh, interesting. See, like, I don't know. I think Jatavian Sanders is interesting and has some playmaking ability there. I mean, I don't think he's as good as you know, Tyler Warren is, but that just made me somewhat nervous though, just because they drafted him, you know, Sanders last year, and it's like, would they, you know, really draft a tight end again here with Warren and do that? I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think in this scenario, if based on Chad Reuter's mock draft, if they're taking Tyler Warren as high as they are, like, to me, Jatavian Sanders is hitting the back burner. And that experiment is essentially over. I mean, you're not drafting a tight end in the top 10 without you saying that this guy is going to be a vocal point of our offense.
Right. Yeah, I guess that's true. I wanted to see him go to a spot where he would just be the sole tight end there and on a more tight end needy team than the Panthers.
Makes sense. All right. How about the 111, Joe? Who do you got there?
Yeah, at the 111, I ended up going with safety Nick Emenwari, and he went to the Tampa Bay Buccaneers.
All right. So for me at the 111, I went with defensive tackle Mason Graham, who ended up getting drafted by the Jacksonville Jaguars. So you and I both went the IDP route here at 111. What was your thoughts on Nick Emenwari with the Bucs?
Yeah, I like this landing spot for him. You know, I think just with his athleticism, you know, him kind of being wild card or used as a chess piece, I think Todd Bowles is a perfect kind of coach to kind of move him around and get the most out of him. You know, he's a box type safety. You could also see him playing a little bit at linebacker. And if you know, saw our talking about some IDP recently, you know, I had thought about another linebacker playing opposite of Levante David. So maybe Emenwari is kind of that do-it-all guy that can mix it up in there and create some havoc on the defensive side for the Buccaneers.
It's interesting. I didn't really like this landing spot that much. I mean, you already have.
I mean, it's not the Vikings like we talked about, but I mean,
No.
it's
If
still
it was the Vikings, it'd be a different story. I mean, but you've
yeah,
got Antoine Winfield already there. I know he's a different build of a
yeah.
safety. But they also have the name is escaping me for whatever reason. I hate when that happens. But it's the safety out of Georgia that they drafted. I know sometimes he plays nickel for them, but he
Talking about
obviously
Tyke Smith.
there it is, Tyke Smith. Yeah, so he had a really. I mean, he was kind of a hybrid guy. Kind of rotated between both positions. So To me, I don't really love the landing spot for Nick Amon-Worry. I did not have
I
him in my top 12.
I guess I was looking at it from, Tyke Smith. It does look like they're going to play him more at nickel, so I think that kind of frees up that strong safety spot for a guy like Nick Amon-Worry and another guy that can be moved around.
Yeah, so for me with Mason Graham, I think this is a great landing spot for him. You've got really some good defensive line across the board, right? You've got bookends there with Josh Hines-Allen and Trevon Walker. Interior, they've got Eric Armstead. I know, he was signed with the former regime with Trent Baalke and Doug Peterson, but he's still a really good player. Has dealt with some injuries, but he's played really well. They also have Mason Smith if they end up want to incorporate him. So having a guy like Mason Graham, he won't have to be he could play really 0 tech to 5 tech all the way through. So to me, he's going to be able to be that pass rushing defensive tackle. And I think he could really do quite well in that Jacksonville landing spot. It's defensive tackle, but when you have an elite defensive tackle, you could see a real big point differential there. So I felt like he was worthy of the top 12.
Yeah, I think he's worthy of the top 12 as well. And if you paid attention to where, our IDP landing spots video, the Jags is where I had his landing spot.
Yes, you did. I know. Well, let's round this out here at the 112. Joe, who do you got to finish out the first round?
Well, look, I said Mason Graham is worthy of the top 12. So at number 12, I've got defensive tackle Mason Graham. And as we mentioned, with the Jacksonville Jaguars.
There it is. All right. At number 12, felt like I put myself in a little bit of pickle here, but I went with quarterback Shedeur Sanders, who went to the New York Giants. So, Joe, let's round it out here. What was your thinking here for Mason Graham?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, just like I talked about in the landing spot video, I just really like this landing spot for him. As you mentioned, just on a really talented defensive front with not only the edge rushers, but then playing alongside a guy like Eric Armstead. You were asking me if I was concerned about Mason Smith. I told you I wasn't, and kind of similar to your thought, I guess, with the Panthers, if they take Warren, like if they're willing to take Mason Graham this high, then they didn't this is a new regime as well, so they're putting their faith in Mason Graham, and really like the opportunity he would have to use his pass rush ability and get the sacks.
What I've learned in watching the NFL draft for as long as I have is when there was a good player who was drafted within the past year or two, and then they draft that same position at a higher draft pick, that basically tells me like, okay, bye-bye. Right? I mean, like if they take Mason Graham here, I'm pretty nervous if I'm a Mason Smith owner, unless they decide to cut Eric Armstead, like I'm like, this is bad news. Right. So like to me,
Right.
anytime you see that, it's like you want to hang, you kind of have this, like you try to like, I don't say pump yourself up, but you try to be like, well, like it could work out. You try to be like uplifting. Just you might as well just move on, right? Maybe you could find some sucker in your league that will take him and think that there's still a hope and an opportunity. But more often than not, I find when that team, if they go ahead and they draft at already a strength or already a position they draft in the past, that basically look at a guy like a Jonathan Mingo, right? Drafted,
Right.
he ended up getting traded. They drafted Xavier Leggett. That's all that needed to tell you is say, okay, sorry, Mingo. Like, or like a Terrace Marshall before him, right? Not to pick on the Panthers here, but those are just some examples that came to my mind. But for Shedeur Sanders here, I really don't like the landing spot. Yeah, you got Brian Daboll and Joe Shane, who I think are on the chopping block. And you already got Russell Wilson and Jameis Winston in the quarterback room. So would Shedeur Sanders end up starting at some point? I would think he would because the Giants aren't very good. But if they don't, that's probably their only hope for saving their job is if, maybe the last few games of the year, Shedeur Sanders looks really good. John Mara's like, we're going to give him another year. But then if those guys go and they bring in a new head coach and a new GM, Shedeur Sanders, could be replaced by the next quarterback taken. So this is a tough one for me, but, you do get, it is enticing that he would be connected with Malik Neighbors. That would be a, great pairing to have a guy like him. That would be huge, for any quarterback. So I felt like, I'm actually, I give you credit because I was kind of waffling whether to even put him in the first round. You stuck to your guns and you didn't put him in there. But I kind of shuddered under the pressure and put him in there.
Yeah, it was tough for me. Like I did think about it, but it was just at the end of the day, you mentioned it, just the instability of the organization there and what was potentially going to happen with Brian Dable and Joe Shane, and what happens if they're gone. Because it looks good. Like you got your offensive minded head coach right now with Brian Dable, could be a good pairing with Shedeur Sanders, but you also got the two veterans on one of your deals. So I was like, does that mean Shedeur Sanders just isn't going to play his first year? But then you mentioned the enticing part, Malik Neighbors and him having a number one weapon like Malik Neighbors. And we've seen in college when he has that number one option, he hyper targets him. That's kind of one of the knocks is just how much he targeted a guy like Travis Hunter. Now, I don't blame him, but if that sort of thing, translates over to the NFL, he's going to be hyper targeting Malik Neighbors, and a fantasy manager is going to love that.
So that does it for this episode. We just went through our Superflex IDP rookie mock draft with landing spots based off of Chad Reuter's mock draft over at NFL Network. If you haven't done so already, check out our most recent episode where we talked about some other IDP players and where we'd like to see them go is the best landing spots for these IDP players, the top IDP players in Joe and I's minds. So you want to go ahead and check that out if you haven't done so already. If you're new to the channel or you've been listening a few times, we'd really appreciate if you could like and subscribe. We're almost at 1,000. We're trying to get there. We could certainly use your help. Thank you so much for tuning in, and until next time.